Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this class and for making conscious parenting a part of your parenting journey. I thank you and honor that you are showing up for yourself and for your children, and then, in essence, for the world. Today, I want to talk about mom or dad guilt, parent guilt, because it's very real and very relevant, and it's affecting everything. You know, a lot of times when we feel guilt, um, it feels really bad for us. But then what happens is that it leaks into and affects the way that we parent our children and our relationship with them. It leaks into and affects our relationship if we're in a relationship. It leaks into and it can affect our work, our mental health, right? The way that what we believe about ourselves and how we handle challenges. I do want to quickly differentiate between guilt and shame, because this like very famous term, mom guilt or dad guilt, uses the word guilt. Guilt and shame are different though. Guilt isn't actually a really bad thing. Guilt is what we feel when we do something wrong, right? When we make a mistake, we feel guilty about it. Now, we do want to learn how to, feel those feelings and then move out of them, grow from them, become stronger from them so that they don't hold us back. But there's also an aspect of shame that's really important to understand, because what is shame? Shame is not seeing that I did something wrong. It's when I do something wrong, it's believing that there's something wrong with me, right? So, like, if I lost my cool with my children, then I believe that I am a bad mom. Or if I am impatient in me, I believe that I am angry. If I yell, I believe that there's something wrong with me. We make it about who we are as a person. And this is actually even more damaging than mom guilt. Guilt is painful and it's hard, it's annoying, and it does hold us back, and it can kind of affect other parts of our lives. But I do think it's really important for us to acknowledge this aspect, this component of shame, because shame is something that many of us grew up experiencing, right? When someone would tell us, like, you're being a bad girl, or you're talking too much, or you're so disrespectful. Um, because a lot of times the verbiage, there wasn't a distinction between what we were doing. It was just about who we are and what we are. Um, that creates shame, because then we believe things about ourselves. It's not just about being able to see our actions for what they are, but it's really then we believe that there's something wrong with us on the inside deeply. So it's an important distinction to make. And the reason why I bring it up is because I would like you to start to notice when you feel bad about the way that you're parenting. um, what do you tell yourself? Do you tell yourself, oh, I feel guilty, that was the wrong move? Because when we feel guilty and we notice it's the wrong move, it's a lot easier for us to say, okay, now I'm going to move to the correct move. I'm going to be different next time. But if we make the wrong move and we have shame, then we're like, oh, I'm terrible. And we kind of, usually it leads to us giving up more and more on ourselves. So it's a really important distinction to make, um, because it tells us a lot about ourselves and a lot about the way that we're handling challenges. So start to pay attention to that. That's the first thing to do. Now, when you notice that you have guilt or you have shame, there's a lot of different things that we can do about it. The first thing is we want to notice it, and we don't want to stay in that place. And what can help us to not stay in that place is noticing how, again, it just causes us to act worse. It doesn't help us to change, it doesn't help to make us better. And when we can really begin to notice that, it's like sounds very simple, but then it can be an amazing impetus for us to create that change in our life. Now, mom guilt or mom shame is really real because we do things that we regret, that we feel bad about. So it's very unlikely that we will ever be perfect. That is certainly not the point of life or parenting. At least I don't believe it is. And I'm never going to tell you that you're supposed to be a perfect parent or have it all together or know all the right answers all the time. I know I certainly don't. So the first step to ridding ourselves, or not ridding, but uprooting this mom guilt and shame, is noting that I am a human being and I'm going to make mistakes. I'm a parent, I'm a mom, I'm a dad, and I'm going to make mistakes. And that's okay. That's part of my life. That's part of my journey. That's how I learn to be better. Now, this is easier for some people and really hard for some others. Making mistakes has been something my whole life that's really hard for me to admit that I make a mistake. But here's the thing, when we can just admit that we make a mistake and we own it, it's actually very, very empowering. It's empowering because we're saying, hey, I made a mistake. I'm human, and I'm loving the fact that I'm human. I'm loving the fact that because I'm human, I have all these amazing experiences and I have these beautiful children in my life. And because I'm human, now I can grow from the mistake that I made. I can change it. I can learn. This is what's going to propel me to being an even better parent. Now, here's the thing about making mistakes also, which is really important. When we see someone else make mistakes, or we see our children specifically make mistakes, what do we want them to think about themselves? We want them to say, oh, I made a mistake. How can I learn from it? Oh, I made a mistake. Okay, if it wasn't a big deal next, right? Like, to not be too dramatic about it, to be able to move on to the next thing. When we can model to our children that we make a mistake and we're not beating ourselves up, we're letting go and continuing on, this is what we end up teaching them about making mistakes. So next time you feel that mom guilt, like, oh my God, I can't believe I just did that, or I can't believe I just said that, remind yourself that you want to create a space where your children know that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes because none of us are perfect. And the more okay with making mistakes we get, the more resilient we become. And the more resilient our children become, because we will make mistakes. We will mess up. We will lose our cool. We will, our kids will fail a test. They'll be mean to someone. There will be something that happens that goes wrong in their life. They won't make it on the football team. Their artwork won't be chosen for the grand display, whatever it might be, right? They won't win gold or silver or even bronze medal. Making mistakes, not getting it right the first time is such an important part of life to understand. When we allow ourselves to go to the mom guilt and shame, we're essentially telling ourselves it's not okay to make those mistakes. So owning it, and again, as a parent, I know that sometimes if we can't own it for ourselves, own it for your kids. Be okay with mistakes because you want to model that for your children. That's a great way to start, to learn to then also be okay with making your own mistakes. Okay, now here's another thing. It's all right. It's all right to make mistakes. Sometimes we feel like, oh, I was doing so well. I was being so patient. I was on this conscious parenting journey, and then I fell off the wagon. Like, this one thing just ruined it all. That's a very dramatic way to look at life and look at parenting. And when we sink into that mom guilt and that mom shame, and we feel really bad about something that we did or something that we're recurring, that we're doing, then we essentially are giving up instead of saying, you know what, I'm going to do as much as I possibly can. And there's going to be things that I don't do, or I do in a different way than I want to. And I'm not going to throw it all away because I made a mistake. Right? I'm not going to throw it all away. I'm just going to jump right back on. This is a journey. Conscious parenting is not, so the way I approach conscious parenting is not let me teach you all the right things to say all the time. No way. I don't know all the right things to say all the time. It's about constantly asking yourself, what can I do better? Absolutely. Right? We can't constantly be screaming at our children all the time without any control and say oh, it's okay. But when we do lose it, and even if that's once or twice a day, but because we have so many interactions with our kids, but so much of the time we are holding it together, we're working on it, then this is as much as we can ask ourselves, right? We can't ask ourselves for more than that. And we can always get right back on that conscious parenting journey, right? So we shouldn't think that it's all for nothing. Now, another really important part about this, about not having mom guilt, about not having mom shame, is learning to, in those moments, right, that I catch myself doing something that I'm not okay with, that I don't want to be like that. It's to notice why we're behaving that way, what brought us to that point, and to be able to take the time and space to go into it, to notice what was it that triggered us. because conscious parenting isn't about getting it all right, but it is about constantly analyzing ourselves, right? Noticing what we did, what we can do better, where did it come from, what was the trigger, how can we grow from it? So it is an amazing way to rid ourselves of that guilt and shame is to use those moments to catch ourselves in the moment rather than sinking into it, but to say like, okay, I caught myself. I see it. What am I going to do to be better? How am I going to change this situation? Right? Because then that doesn't allow us to sink into the mom guilt and the mom shame. When we can catch ourselves, when we can analyze it, we can say, oh, you know what? I'm a human being. Now I understand where this is coming from. And now I understand how I can move forward. And then we go into like that whole language of noticing our feelings, what were we feeling in that moment? What were we needing? What limiting beliefs might we be holding? What are we telling ourselves in those challenging moments that's causing us to have these, intense feelings that are then we're taking out on our children? What happens is it becomes a whole moment of self-discovery. Instead of allowing us to sink us into that guilt and shame that feels really dark and feels like there's no light at the end of the tunnel, we can use it to actually grow and transform and to become better parents, and most importantly, better people. So we're happier with ourselves, which is a really, really important part. So taking those moments to notice our triggers is incredibly helpful, but also healing. So, and when we can, then we don't allow ourselves to sink that deep into the muck of that mom guilt and that shame. Now, it's also important to have like specific, if you can, affirmations or like a toolbox that you can go to when you find yourself really upset with yourself, right? And this manifests for different people differently. Some people are like, oh, I give up on myself. I'm the worst. I'm awful. I'm angry. What is the self-talk you're using? And what tools can you use to combat it? Combat it in the moment, but also set yourself up for success, right? So for example, at the end of the day, do you want to write down the things that maybe you didn't do, you didn't handle the best way possible that you wish you had handled differently? Well, you could write those down and then do a meditation, or just, even if you're not into meditation, write down the alternative ending. How would that have looked if you had done it differently? And go through it. Actually go back to that moment and envision it and see yourself handling the situation differently and go through it, right? So like, let's say, for example, you're being challenged by your child. You can close your eyes or not. And you're going back to that moment. What did I feel? What was I telling myself? What was I believing? And instead of getting immediately upset and taking out those feelings on my child, I'm pulling myself back in and I'm saying, okay, what was it that I was feeling, needing, and believing? And in that moment, I'm going through it. And when I realize it's about me, it's not about my kid, I'm not going to react the same way to them. And then I'm not going to have any mom guilt. Right? And once you go through that whole, step-by-step process with yourself after the fact, right? Whether it's through meditation or journaling or just in your mind, you're able to say, hey, you know what? I'm a human. I had those big feelings. There's a reason I was being triggered. Now, the deeper work is to figure out why you're being triggered, right? On a deep level. And that's what we go into in our one-on-one coaching. Because when we do, then that's how we can heal and then learn how to do it differently for ourselves. Now, once we get familiar with our feelings and our limiting beliefs and the needs that aren't being met, and we can know when we're going to get triggered, right? Something happens and we're like, oh, I'm familiar with this feeling. I know where it's coming from. Another part of our toolbox is having something ready for ourselves to help us learn how to regulate so that we don't take it out on our children. So what does that look like? Okay, I'm feeling a lot of overwhelm. Excuse me, I'm feeling a lot of overwhelm. And my kids are calling me from all different directions. And so I'm just like gonna scream. But what am I noticing? I'm realizing that I'm feeling this overwhelm because I'm trying to be everywhere at once. And I expect that from myself. And I think I'm supposed to be perfect. And they're proving to me that I'm not, and I don't have it all. I don't have it, all covered in every single moment. And that's triggering. And so we take it on them, like, stop calling me, right? Like, everybody leave me alone. Can't you see I'm only one person? But they're not looking at it from that perspective, especially young children. They're not seeing it in that light, in that way. They just need what they want in that moment. They're not thinking like, oh, I'm overwhelming my parent. So for us to notice, like, it's not about them. They're not trying to hurt us. It's about, and perhaps it's not even their responsibility to notice that they're overwhelming us. That's a deep one too. But why am I feeling overwhelmed right now? And how can I help myself um, to not feel overwhelmed in that moment? Okay. So that can take a lot of practice, but is there an affirmation like, I can't be everywhere at once. I just can't be everywhere at once. And that's okay. I'm accepting myself. I'm a good enough parent. I'm a great parent, not just good enough. I'm a great parent, even though I can't be everywhere at once. Right. Um, or, is there like, can you just get a sip of water? Or can you put some music on? Right? What can you do not to distract yourself, but to help yourself calm down? Because what we're doing right now is we're trying to figure out, right, where is my mom guilt coming from? And once I figure out where it's coming from, what is it that how is it that I'm being triggered so that I react in a way that creates mom guilt or shame? More importantly, the shame, what can I do about it? What can I do so that I don't even have to go there? Now, let's say we're just so shameful, like we just hold so much shame around parenting. This is something that we really need to deeply heal, because you don't deserve to hold shame around parenting. And it could be perhaps that you were grown up thinking, or seeing a parent like completely sacrificing who they are for you as a child. And so now as a parent, you think you're supposed to do, like your belief tells you you're supposed to do that, but then it doesn't feel good when you do that. You don't really want to do that. It doesn't, you want to take care of yourself too. And every time you go to take care of yourself, you have so much shame because you're like, oh my God, I'm so selfish, or I'm thinking just about myself. So that's an example, right? That's an example of deep rooted shame. And that will create that thing that we know and call mom guilt. And it won't be as obvious because it will just be this like underlying feeling that just never goes away. And that's like really hard to live with. It's really hard to live with and to function from a really strong, intelligent place when we're feeling like that. That's a deeper work to do. And I'm here to support you through it. But what you can start to do is to notice, like what are those like feelings and where's it coming from? And a lot of times it helps to analyze the kinds of parents and adults who we had relationships with as children, and how did we view them? How did we see them? What did we believe about them? What did they believe about their relationship as adult? And what were they projecting onto us through that? And when we start to understand it, we can also start to see those links between how we are parenting and how we're handling those challenges. It's really deep work, but all of this work can help us tremendously in transforming those deep feelings that hold us back, that make us feel so bad about ourselves, Because if you're here listening to this class right now, that means you have so much that you're giving to your children, because the most important part is you recognize that there's so much to grow and to learn and to change. And that's really, truly the most important part of conscious parenting. Because once you're awake to it and you're alert about it and you know it, man, it makes it so much easier. I mean, it's hard in the moment, but at least you know that it's there. You know that you can achieve and feel like this great feeling around being a parent. And you can have this amazing, respectful, wonderful relationship with your children. And you can feel happy within it. We're not learning conscious parenting to just make life better for our kids and not repeat mistakes that our parents made, or not like ruin our kids. We're also learning it so that we can feel good, because we have our whole lives ahead of us. There is so much that we deserve to feel and to grow and to have as human beings, not just as parents. And so we just want to remove this guilt and shame that keeps us from functioning at our highest level as parents. So I really, truly thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here today and for listening to this. And I hope it helped. Please let me know if you have any questions around this topic. And as always, I'm so interested to know what you would like to hear from me. Have a wonderful rest of your day.